In the days that followed the tribunal recess, the situation on Station Keth 4 changed in ways that no one had predicted. News of the human captain who faced prison for feeding starving children spread across the station networks and then across the sector networks and then across the entire galactic communication grid. Humans from dozens of ships and stations sent messages of support, and many of them traveled to Keth 4 to join the growing crowd of those willing to share in Yuna's punishment. The Galactic Commerce Authority found itself facing an unexpected problem, because prosecuting one human for a clear violation was simple, but prosecuting hundreds of humans threatened to create a diplomatic incident that no one wanted. Adjudicator Vorith requested a private meeting with Yuna, and they met in a small chamber adjacent to the main tribunal hall. The Serpentine Magistrate coiled himself on a raised platform and studied the human captain with ancient eyes that had seen countless trials and countless criminals. "You have created a very complicated situation," Vorith said. "That was not my intention," Yuna replied. "And yet here we are," Vorith said, "and I find myself unable to determine the appropriate course of action." He paused, and his forked tongue flickered thoughtfully. "I have served as adjudicator for almost 300 years," he continued, "and in all that time, I have never encountered a species that behaves the way humans behave." "How do you mean?" Yuna asked. "I mean that your actions make no sense within any framework I understand," Vara said. "And you had nothing to gain and everything to lose, and yet you chose to help. Anyway," Yuna nodded slowly. "I understand why that might seem strange to you," she said. "Strange is not a sufficient word," Vorith replied, "and I would use the word incomprehensible." He uncoiled slightly and lowered his head closer to Yuna's level. "I need to understand why," he said, and his voice was quieter now. "And I am asking not as an adjudicator, but as someone who genuinely wishes to comprehend what drives your species." Yuna was quiet for a moment, and she seemed to be gathering her thoughts. "My grandmother was a child during a terrible war on my homeworld," she said finally, "and her city was destroyed, and her family was killed, and she was left alone in the ruins with nothing but the clothes on her body." Vorith listened in silence. "She should have died," Yuna continued, "and by all logic she should have starved or been killed by the chaos around her, but she survived because strangers helped her." "What strangers?" Vorith asked. "People who had no obligation to help," Yuna said, "and people who risked their own safety to protect a child they did not know, and a child who could offer them nothing in return." She paused, and her eyes grew distant with memory. "One family hid her in their home for 3 months, even though they barely had enough food for themselves, and they shared everything they had with her, because they could not bear to watch a child suffer." "But why?" Vorith pressed. "What did they gain from this sacrifice?" "Nothing," Yuna said. "They gained nothing except the knowledge that they had done something good in a world filled with cruelty." She looked directly at Vorith, and her gaze was steady and unwavering. "My grandmother lived because of their kindness, and she grew up and had children, and her children and I exist because strangers chose compassion over indifference." Vorith was silent for a long moment. "And this is why you helped the Veluxi mother," he said finally. "Yes," Yuna said, "because I carry my grandmother's story with me everywhere. I go and I cannot look at a mother begging for her children's lives and turn away. Even if it costs you everything." Vorith asked. "Especially if it costs me everything," Yuna said, "because that is when it matters most." Vorith coiled and uncoiled slowly, and his ancient eyes seemed troubled. "Your species is very young," he said, "and you have only been part of galactic society for a short time, and I wonder if you understand the implications of what you are doing." "What do you mean?" Yuna asked. "I mean that compassion is dangerous," Vorith said, "and kindness without calculation can be exploited and abused, and those who give freely often find themselves with nothing left to give." Yuna nodded. "I know," she said, and humans have been exploited before, and we have been betrayed by those we tried to help, and we have suffered for our compassion. And yet you continue. Vorith said. Yes, Una said. Because the alternative is to become something we do not want to be. She leaned forward slightly. We could choose to be cold and calculating like so many species in the galaxy, she said. And we could weigh every action against potential gain, and we could protect ourselves by caring only for our own. Her voice grew stronger. But then we would lose something essential about who we are, and we would become just another species, driven by self-interest, and we would forget the strangers who saved my grandmother and all the other strangers throughout our history who chose kindness over safety. Vorith was quiet for a very long time. I do not know what to do with you, he admitted finally. You could do what is right, Una said gently. And what is right? Vorith asked. Review the embargo policy, Una said. Because whatever the Veluxi government did, the children are innocent, and they should not starve, because of politics they cannot control. Before Vorith could respond, a chime sounded, and he turned toward a communication panel on the wall. Adjudicator. A voice announced. A representative from the Galactic Commerce Authority headquarters has arrived, and they wish to speak with you regarding the human situation. Varus sighed, and it was a surprisingly human sound. Send them in, he said. The door opened and a tall Mallory entered the chamber, and its crystalline body glittered with official authority. Markings, Adjudicator Vorith. The Mallory said, I am here to resolve this unfortunate situation before it causes further embarrassment to the authority. Una straightened and prepared herself for whatever came next. On board the steady horizon, the Sari sat beside her children and watched them sleep, and their bioluminescence had grown stronger every day, and they were going to survive. The eldest larva stirred and opened its eyes and looked up at its mother. Where are the soft ones? It asked in a small voice. Thessery smiled and stroked her child's head gently. They are coming back soon, she said, and they are fighting for us. Why? The larva asked. The Sari thought about the question for a long moment. Because that is what humans do, she said finally, and even as she spoke the words, she was still not sure she understood what they truly meant. The Mallory representative stood in the center of the tribunal chamber and addressed the assembled crowd with the cold precision of a bureaucrat who had dealt with difficult situations before. The Galactic Commerce Authority proposes a resolution, the representative announced, and this resolution is designed to end this unfortunate incident with minimal damage to all parties involved. Una stood on the central platform and waited. Captain Isio and all other humans who have confessed to embargo violations will receive formal reprimands that will remain on their permanent records. The Mallory continued. But no material punishment will be imposed, and no ships will be seized, and no trade licenses will be revoked. Murmur of relief rippled through the crowd of humans who had gathered to support Una. In exchange, the Mallory said, the humans will cease their public statements regarding this matter and will refrain from further criticism of authority policies. The chamber fell silent, and everyone looked at Unash. Stood still for a moment, and then she shook her head slowly. No, she said. The Mallory's crystalline body flickered with surprise. No, it repeated. I cannot accept those terms, Una said, because the embargo policy has not changed, and Veluxi children are still starving throughout the sector, and accepting this deal means accepting that their suffering will continue. Captain CO. The Mallory said, and its voice carried a warning tone. The authority is offering you an extremely generous resolution, and it would be unwise to reject it. I understand it, Una said, and I am grateful for the offer, but I cannot stay silent. While children die, she stepped forward, and her voice grew louder so that everyone in the chamber could hear. I want the embargo policy reviewed, she said, and specifically, I want the provisions that punish civilian dependents to be reconsidered, because the children have done nothing wrong, and they should not suffer for the actions of their government. Mallory representative made a sound that might have been a sigh. You're asking us to change established policy because of one incident. It said, I am asking you to change established policy because it is wrong. Yuna replied, and if we refuse? The Mallory asked. Yuna looked around the chamber at the hundreds of humans who had come to stand with her, and at the growing crowd of observers from other species who had gathered to watch. Then we will continue to help the Veluxi, she said, and we will continue to break your laws, and we will continue to accept whatever punishment you impose. She turned back to face the Mallory directly. Humans did not survive ice ages and plagues and wars and near extinction by abandoning our young when times got hard, and we are not going to start now just because it is inconvenient for the Galactic Commerce Authority. The chamber was absolutely silent. The Mallory representative stood motionless for a long moment, and its crystalline body pulsed with internal light as it considered the situation. You are new to galactic society, it said finally, and making enemies this early is extremely unwise. We are not trying to make enemies, Yuna said, and we are simply trying to do what is right. Adjudicator. Vorith rose from his platform and his serpentine body uncoiled to its full impressive length. If I may speak, he said. The Mallory nodded. I have presided over this case from the beginning, Vorith said, and I have observed something that troubles me deeply. He turned to look at the crowd of humans and then at the Sari who stood at the edge of the chamber. I have served the law for 3 centuries, he continued, and I have always believed that the law was sufficient unto itself, and that following the rules was all that was required of a civilized being. His ancient eyes grew distant. But these humans have shown me that there is something beyond the law and something that the law cannot capture, and I do not have a word for it in my language. He looked at Yuna. You called it compassion, he said, and you called it doing what is right, and I confess that I still do not fully understand it. He turned to face the Mallory representative. But I know that I do not want to be part of a system that punishes people for feeding starving children, and I recommend that the authority accept Captain Seo's request and review the embargo provisions regarding civilian dependence. The chamber erupted in murmurs and whispers, and the Mallory representative stood perfectly still as it processed this unexpected development. Finally, it spoke. The authority will take the adjudicator's recommendation under advisement, it said, and a review of the relevant provisions will be conducted. It paused, and its crystalline body flickered with what might have been frustration. This is not a guarantee of change, it added, but it is a beginning. Yuna nodded slowly. A beginning is enough for now, she said. The tribunal was officially closed, and the crowd began to disperse, and the Zari made her way through the chamber toward Yunash, stopped in front of the human captain, and for a long moment she could not find the words to speak. You won, she said finally. Not yet, Yuna said, but we made progress. The Sari shook her head slowly. I came to you with nothing, she said, and I offered you my service and my labor and my very life in exchange for food for my children. She paused, and her wings trembled. And you took none of it, and you asked for nothing, and you risked everything just to help strangers you would never see again. Yuna smiled gently. That is not entirely true, she said. Thessary looked at her in confusion. What do you mean? She asked. I mean that I was hoping you might consider staying, Yuna said, and not as a servant or a laborer, but as a member of my crew. The Sari stared at her. You want me to work on your ship? She asked. I want you to be part of our family, Yuna said, and your translation skills would be incredibly valuable, and your children would have a safe place to grow, and you would have a home. The Sari felt something break inside her chest, and it was the last wall she had built around her heart. I do not understand your species, she whispered. You do not have to understand us, Yuna said. You just have to trust us, and for reasons she could not explain. The Zari found that she did. 1 week later, the Steady Horizon departed from Station Kethfor and set course for the outer Territories where there was cargo to haul and work to be done. Thesari stood in the cockpit beside Una and watched the stars stretch into lines as the ship entered faster than light. Her children were safe in the crew quarters, and the eldest, Larva, had already begun learning to read human star charts under Minji's patient instruction. "Captain," Thesari said quietly, "I still have a question. Ask me anything." Una said, "You said there is no debt between us," Thesari said. "And you said that what you did was simply obvious and not special or unusual." Una nodded. "But to me, it is the most extraordinary thing I have ever witnessed." Thesari continued, "And I do not know how to live with that." Una turned to look at her, and her strange round eyes were warm and kind. "Then pass it on," she said. "And someday, when you meet someone who needs help, and you have the power to help them, then you help them, even if there is nothing to gain." Thesari asked, "Especially then?" Una said Thesari looked out at the stars streaming past the cockpit window, and she thought about her children, sleeping safely in their bunks, and she thought about the humans who had saved them without asking for anything in return. She did not fully understand compassion, and she did not fully understand kindness, and she did not fully understand this strange soft species that had welcomed her into their family. But she was beginning to learn, and perhaps that was enough. The Commerce Tribunal Hall was a massive chamber built of polished black stone and filled with floating platforms where officials sat in judgment over those who violated Galactic trade law. Una stood alone on a small platform in the center of the chamber, and above her loomed the serpentine form of adjudicator, Vorth, who was known throughout the sector as a magistrate who followed the law without mercy or exception. "Captain Una Seo of the human vessel Steady Horizon," Vorth announced in a voice that echoed through the chamber. "You are charged with providing material aid to members of an embargoed species in direct violation of galactic commerce authority regulations." Una stood straight and calm, and her face showed no fear. "I understand the charges," she said. "The evidence against you is substantial," Vorth continued, "and we have testimony from station security and medical records from your ship, and the Veluxi individuals themselves are currently aboard your vessel." "That is correct, Una," said Vorth's serpentine body coiled and uncoiled in what might have been confusion. "You do not deny the charges?" he asked. "No," Una said. "I do not deny them, because I did exactly what you say I did." The chamber fell silent, and the various officials and observers seemed uncertain how to respond to such a direct admission. "Then you understand the penalties," Vorth said, "which includes seizure of your vessel and revocation of your trade license and a prison sentence of no less than 5 standard years." "I understand," Una said. From the side of the chamber, Thesari watched with growing horror, and she could not let this human be destroyed for helping her children. She stepped forward, and her voice rang out across the tribunal hall. "Adjudicator," she called, "I must testify, and I must tell you that I deceived this human, and she did not know. I was Veluxi, and she did not know about the embargo." Una turned to look at her and shook her head firmly. "That is not true," Una said loudly, "and I knew exactly who she was, and I knew exactly what I was doing when I chose to help her." "Captain Isio," Vorth said with irritation in his voice, "your advocate is trying to provide you with a defense, and you would be wise to accept it." "I do not want a false defense," Una said, "because I am not ashamed of what I did, and I would do it again." Vorth stared at her for a long moment, and his forked tongue flickered in and out of his mouth. "I do not understand," he said finally. "And your species has no treaty with the Veluxi and no alliance and no debt to repay, and yet you risked everything to help them." "That is correct," Una said. "Why?" Vorth demanded, and his voice was sharp with frustration. Una took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice was clear and strong. "Because 3 children were dying," she said, "and I could prevent it, and that is all the reason I needed." The tribunal chamber erupted in murmurs and whispers, and Vorith raised one clawed hand for silence. "That is not how galactic society functions," he said, "and trade and aid are governed by agreements and contracts and mutual obligations. I understand that is how galactic society functions," Una said, "but that is not how humans function." She paused and looked around the chamber at the dozens of alien faces watching her. "My species has a long and painful history," she continued, "and we have seen what happens when people stand by and do nothing while innocents suffer. And we have seen famines and wars and children dying in camps while others looked away." Her voice grew stronger and more passionate. "We learned that the measure of a civilization is not how it treats the powerful, but how it treats those who have nothing to offer in return. And we learned that silence in the face of suffering is itself a form of cruelty." She pointed toward the Sari. "That mother came to me with nothing to offer except her desperation, and she begged me to help her children, and I could have said no, and I could have protected myself and my crew and my ship." Una shook her head. "But if I had done that, then I would not deserve to call myself human." Vorith was silent for a long moment, and his serpentine body remained perfectly still. "These are noble sentiments," he said finally, "but the law is the law, and noble sentiments do not exempt you from consequences." "I am aware of that," Una said, "and I am prepared to accept whatever punishment you impose." "Even prison?" Vorith asked. "Even prison," Una said, "because at least I will know that 3 children are alive because I chose to help them." The Zari felt tears streaming down her face, and she could not believe what she was witnessing, and this human was willing to sacrifice years of her life for a stranger and her children. Before Vorith could respond, the doors of the tribunal chamber opened, and a commotion erupted at the entrance. Human male in a captain's uniform pushed his way into the chamber, and his voice boomed across the hall. "Adjudicator." "Vorith," the man called out. "My name is Captain Junho Kwan of the freighter New Horizon, and I am here to confess." Vorith's body tensed with irritation. "Confess to what?" he demanded. "I have been running supplies to embargo Veluxi colonies for the past 6 months," Junho said. "And if you are going to punish Captain Seo, then you will have to punish me as well." Another voice called out from the back of the chamber. "And me," a human woman shouted. "I am Dr. Sora Yoon, and I have been treating Veluxi refugees in secret for almost a year." More humans began entering the tribunal hall, and each one stepped forward to confess their own violations. "I smuggled medicine to Veluxi children on Station Keth 7. I hid a Veluxi family on my ship for 3 weeks. I provided fuel and repairs to Veluxi vessels in distress." Vorith watched in stunned silence as more and more humans filled the chamber, and each one demanded to share in whatever punishment awaited. Una Thessery stared at the growing crowd of humans, and she could not comprehend what she was seeing. These beings had come from across the station, and perhaps from across the sector, and they were risking their own freedom to stand beside a woman they might not even know. This was not rational, and this was not logical, and this was something that her species had no word for. Vorith finally raised his hand for silence, and the chamber slowly quieted. "This tribunal will recess," he announced, and his voice was heavy with something that might have been exhaustion, "while we determine how to proceed with this unprecedented situation." As the officials filed out of the chamber, Una turned to look at the crowd of humans who had come to support her. "Thank you," she said quietly. "All of you." Junho walked over and clasped her shoulder. "You did not think we would let you face this alone," he said with a smile. Thessery approached Una slowly, and her wings trembled with emotion. "I do not understand your species," she whispered. Una smiled at her. "That is okay," she said. "Sometimes we do not understand ourselves either." The Zari had been begging at the docking ports for 6 days now, and her wings had lost their shine from hunger and exhaustion and shame. But she could not stop, because her children were dying in the darkness below the station. She was Veluxi, and Her kind had been blacklisted from all trade after their homeworld government defied the Galactic Commerce Authority, and now every Veluxi trapped off-world was slowly starving because no species would risk the heavy fines that came with helping. Them, the Kathrani merchants turned her away with cold eyes, and the Vorthax traders laughed at her. Desperation and the Mallory simply pretended she did not exist, as if her suffering was invisible to them. She had offered everything she had to offer, and she had nothing left but herself. Her translation skills were excellent, because she spoke 9 languages fluently, and she had offered those skills to anyone who would listen, but they all said the same thing, and the same thing was always noon. The 7th day, she saw a ship she did not recognize, and its design was strange and unfamiliar, and the markings on its hull were in a language she had never seen before. A crew member walked down the loading ramp, and the Sari noticed the creature was soft and furless, with strained round eyes and pale skin, and it moved with an odd confidence that she could not understand. She had heard rumors about these beings, and they were called humans, and they were new to the galaxy, and nobody knew what to make of them. Yet some said humans were dangerous predators from a death world where everything tried to kill everything else, and some said they were unpredictable and violent, and others said they were simply strange in ways that defied explanation. Tasha did not care if they were dangerous because her children had stopped glowing 2 days ago, and that meant they were dying, and she would face any danger for them. She approached the human with her wings folded low in submission and her antennae pressed flat against her head in the universal posture of desperate pleading. The human looked at her and did not immediately walk away, and that small thing felt like hope. "Please," the Zari said in the common trade language, "please, I'm begging you to help me, and I will give you anything you want, and I will do anything you ask." The human tilted its head and studied her with those strange round eyes, and the Zari could not read the expression on its soft face. "What do you need?" the human asked, and its voice was neither cruel nor kind, but simply curious. "Food," the Zari said, and her voice cracked with desperation. "I need food for my children, and they are dying, and I have tried everyone, and no one will help me because my species is embargoed." The human was quiet for a moment, and the Zari prepared herself for rejection again. "Where are your children?" The human Isket the Zari blinked in confusion, because that was not the question she expected, and she expected questions about payment or service or contracts. "They are hidden," she said carefully, "in the maintenance tunnels below the station, where no one goes because it is condemned and dangerous." "How many children?" the human asked. "3, the Sari whispered. 3 larvae, and they are so young, and they have done nothing wrong, and they do not deserve to die because of politics. They cannot understand." The human nodded slowly and then spoke into a small device on its wrist. "De Young," the human said. "I need emergency rations and the full medical kit, and bring Minji too, because we might need her xenobiology training." The Zari stared at the human in confusion because she had not agreed to any terms yet, and no contract had been discussed. "Wait," the Zari said. "Wait, you have not told me your price, and you have not told me what you want from me in exchange." The human looked at her with an expression the Zari could not interpret. "You said your children are dying." The human said, "Show me where they are." "But the terms?" The Zari insisted because this was wrong, and this was not how transactions worked. "I need to know what you want, and I can offer my services as a translator, and I can work on your ship for years, and I can do anything you need." The human raised one hand in a gesture that seemed to mean stop. "My name is Yuniseo," the human said, "and I am the captain of this ship, and right now the only thing I want is for you to show me where your children are so we can help them." The Sari felt something strange in her chest, and it might have been hope, or it might have been terror because she did not understand what was happening. "You would risk fines," she said. "You would risk your trade license and your ship and your freedom just to help strangers who cannot pay you." "Yes," Yuna said simply as if the answer was a bias theory, did not know what to say, because this did not fit into any framework. She understood, and in the galaxy, everything was transactional, and kindness was always a trap, and generosity was always leverage for future demands. But her children were dying, and she had no other choice. "Follow me," she said. She led the human captain through the crowded station corridors and down into the lower levels, where the lights flickered and the air smelled of rust and decay, and then deeper still, into the condemned maintenance tunnels where she had hidden her family. 2 more humans joined them along the way, and one was a tall male named Da-Young who carried heavy bags of supplies, and the other was a smaller female named Minji who carried medical equipment. They did not complain about the darkness or the danger, and they simply followed Dasari stopped at a hidden panel in the tunnel wall, and she pressed her palm against the cold metal and whispered to her children that she had returned. The panel slid open and revealed a small space behind the wall where 3 larval children lay in a nest of torn fabric and salvaged insulation. They were so still, and their bioluminescence had faded to almost nothing, and they did not respond when the Sari called their names. "Oh no," Minji whispered, and she immediately knelt beside the nest and began scanning the larvae with her medical. Devise Yuna stood beside the Sari and looked at the dying children, and her face showed something that the Sari had never seen on an alien face before. It looked like pain, and it looked like anger, and it looked like determination all mixed together. "Dae-young," Yuna said quietly, "contact the ship and tell them to prepare the medical bay, and we are bringing 3 patients aboard." "Captain," Dae-young said carefully, "if we do this and station security finds out, then we could lose everything." Yuna did not look away from the children. "I know," she said, "and I do not care, because I am not going to stand here and watch children die when I can prevent it." The Sari felt her legs give way beneath her, and she collapsed against the tunnel wall, and she did not understand these humans, and she did not understand why they were helping her. "Why?" she asked, and her voice was barely a whisper. "Why are you doing this?" Yuna knelt beside her and placed one soft, warm hand on the Sari's arm. "Because you asked me to feed your children," Yuna said, "and I can, and for the first time in 6 days." The Sari allowed herself to believe that her children might survive. The humans moved with a speed and purpose that the Sari had never seen before, and within minutes her 3 larvae were carefully wrapped in thermal blankets and carried through the tunnels toward the docking. Minji held the smallest larva against her chest and whispered soft sounds that the Sari did not understand, but the sounds were gentle and warm, and her child seemed to respond to them. Dae-young carried the other 2 larvae, and he moved with surprising care for such a large being, and he kept checking to make sure they were still breathing. Yuna walked beside the Sari and guided her through the corridors, because the Sari could barely see through the tears that filled her compound eyes. "Almost there," Yuna said. "Just a little further, and then we can get them proper treatment." They reached the ship, and its name was painted on the hull in human letters, and the Sari would later learn it was called the Steady Horizon. The interior was warm and bright, and it smelled like metal and food and something else that the Sari could not identify, but it smelled safe. Minji immediately took the larvae to a room filled with medical equipment, and she began connecting them to machines that monitored their vital signs. "They are severely malnourished," Minji said as she studied the readouts, "and they need specific proteins that their species requires during the larval stage, or their organs will begin to fail." "Can you synthesize what they need?" Yuna asked, and Minji nodded and began working at a console, and her fingers moved quickly across the controls. "It will take a few hours," she said, "but I can create a nutrient paste from our supplies that should contain everything they need to recover." The Sari stood in the corner of the medical bay and watched these strange, soft aliens work to save her children, and she still could not understand why they were doing this. She had offered them nothing, and they had asked for nothing. and they simply helped because she had asked them to. Help. This was not how the galaxy worked, and this was not how any species behaved. And there had to be something she was missing. Captain Yuna, the Zari said carefully. I need to understand what is happening here. Yuna turned to look at her, and the human's expression was patient and kind. What do you mean? Yuna asked. I mean that I still do not know your price, the Zari said. And in my experience, nothing is free, and kindness is always a trap, and I am afraid to believe that you truly want nothing from me. Yuna was quiet for a moment, and she seemed to be choosing her words carefully on my world. Yuna said slowly, we have a concept that does not translate well into the common trade language, and it is the idea that some things should be done simply because they are. Right. The Zari tilted her head in confusion. But what do you gain? She asked. Nothing. Yuna said, we gain nothing, except the knowledge that we did not let children die when we could have saved them. That makes no sense, the Zari said, and she could hear the frustration in her own voice. Everything in the galaxy is based on exchange and value and mutual benefit, and you are telling me that humans help strangers for no reason at all. Yuna smiled, and it was a strange expression that showed her small blunt teeth. Where I come from, Yuna said, we call this being a decent person, and it is not special or unusual, and it is just what you do when you see someone in need. But the risk, the Zari insisted. You risk fines and imprisonment and the loss of your ship and your livelihood. And all of that for strangers you will never see again. Yuna shrugged, and the gesture seemed casual, but her eyes were serious. My grandmother survived a terrible war, Yuna said, and she survived because strangers helped her when they had no reason to help, and those strangers risked their own lives to protect a child they did not know. She paused and looked at the Zari with those strained round eyes. She taught me that the measure of a person is not what they do when it is easy, but what they do when it is hard, and when there is nothing to gain. And right now helping your children is hard, and there is nothing to gain, and so this is exactly when it matters most. The Zari felt something shift inside her chest, and it was like a wall crumbling that she did not know she had built. I do not know how to respond to this, she whispered. You do not have to respond, Yuna said. You just have to let us help. Minji looked up from her work and smiled. The first batch of nutrient paste is ready, she said, and we should start feeding them immediately. She approached the smallest larva and carefully administered a small amount of paste through a feeding tube, and the larva stirred weakly in response. That is a good sign, Minji said with relief in her voice. Over the next few hours, the Zari watched the humans care for her children with a tenderness that broke her heart and rebuilt it at the same time. Jung sat beside the largest larva and told its stories in a quiet voice, even though the child could not understand human words. Minji monitored their vital signs constantly and adjusted the nutrient mixture based on their responses. Other crew members came and went, and each one offered help or brought supplies, or simply sat with the Zari and kept her company. By the 6th hour, the larvae began to glow again, and it was faint and weak, but it was there, and it meant they were going to Thessery. Wept, and she did not try to hide her tears because these humans had saved her children, and she did not know how to thank them. They are going to be okay, Minji said gently. They just need rest and food and time to recover. The Zari nodded and wiped her eyes with her folded wings. I owe you a debt that I can never repay, she said. Yuna shook her head. You owe us nothing, she said, because this is not a debt, and it is not a transaction, and it is just one group of people helping another. Before the Zari could respond, the medical bay door opened and the young entered with a worried expression on his face. Captain, he said, we have a problem, and station security is at the docking bay, and they know about the Veluxi, and they are demanding to speak with you. Yuna sighed, and her face hardened with determination. Stay here with the children, she told the Zari, and I will handle this. The Zari watched the human captain walk out to face the authorities, and she wondered what price Yuna would ultimately pay for her kindness, and she promised herself that whatever happened next, she would find a way to repay these humans even if it took her entire lifetime to do so.